Hi, welcome to another endorsement interview with the Times Editorial Board. Today we have two candidates for state representative in the 10th District. We have the incumbent, Chuck Moseley, a Democrat, and the challenger, John Johnson, a Republican. We should start by very briefly tell us who you are and you know what prepared you for this race. John.
I'm John Johnston. I'm a retired Marine, retired in 1996 after 26 years in the Marine Corps. Then I took employment at Portage High School, where I was the senior Marine instructor for almost 18 years, 17 and a half years or so. Did you ask what my qualifications were for the job? Is that what?
Exactly.
Okay. My qualifications to become the next representative for the 10th District are my experience. I've worked in government in my career. I have worked a variety of jobs. I've worked at the National Security Agency. I've worked at the Pentagon. I've had a variety of jobs and leadership positions in the Marine Corps. And more particular, as far as the district and my qualification in the district, I've lived there for 18 years, actually longer than any place I've ever lived. So Portage, this area, Portage, the 10th District is my home now. I worked as the senior Marine instructor at Portage High School, and in so doing that, I had a good overview of the demographics, the socioeconomics of the students. Got to know what the teachers are up against at the schools. Met a lot of families, did a lot of things in the community, got to know a lot of people. So I have a real good feel for the area. So I think that gives me a real good handle on the needs of the community at large.
Okay, Chuck.
Well, I'm Chuck Moseley. I'm your current state representative for the 10th District. I want to start by thanking you for having us here today. We very much appreciate that. I've been a legislator since the beginning of 2009. I have been involved in the legislature at various levels, many levels in fact. Currently, I'm the ranking member of Labor, Pensions, and Unemployment. I also serve on the Pension Management Oversight Commission. I currently serve on Veterans Affairs and Public Safety. I formerly served on the Public Health Committee. I formerly served on the Energy Committee. So I have a very well-rounded level of experience and knowledge to be a state representative. I do live in Portage. I've lived there since 1978. In fact, I think Mr. Johnson lives in Liberty Township, but I've been a Portage resident since 1978. I've been married for 42 years to my beautiful wife, Monica. I have a couple of great kids and 5 fantastic grandchildren. Qualifications for the job, I think my record speaks for itself. I've had an opportunity to be very involved in a lot of legislation, either being an author, co-author, or co-sponsor of I don't know how many bills, a number of bills. I have a particular interest and focus on job creation as it relates to veterans. I've had the opportunity and I've been fortunate to be able to get some legislation passed and administrative rules applied and changed that do create jobs for veterans. In fact, it was reported in your own paper, Doug, not long ago, that I was able to work with the BMV and we were able to create a fast-track process for veterans returning from active duty to be able to acquire their CDL license without going through additional training that they already received in the military, that gets them on the street and gets them into the workforce much faster. I'm really proud of the fact that shortly after that, the state Indiana American Legion recognized me as a legislator of the year for those efforts to get those folks to work when they come back from active duty. So those are just a few of the qualifications that I have. It's something that I've enjoyed doing. It's something that I feel I have an ability to do well. And I guess that's pretty much my short answer.
Okay. Well, I'm glad you mentioned jobs because job creation is on everybody's mind. So what's your strategy, John?
Well, my strategy is for one, to continue doing what I'm doing. As I said, I was able to create that opportunity for young people returning from active duty to be able to fast track into the transportation industry. I also was fortunate to be able to co-author in a bipartisan effort a bill, I believe it's 1486, but don't hold me to the number, a bill that also recognizes certification of military personnel that were trained in the medical field to be able to come home and to be able to avoid the costly long drawn-out certification process to become EMTs and paramedics, which, Doug, I'm sure you know, there's a big shortage of qualified people for that throughout the state. They're looking for people all the time. So this is a great opportunity for these young people to get into the workforce. The other thing that I've also constantly been involved in is being a member of the Department of Workforce Development and our efforts collectively in a bipartisan fashion to create job opportunities throughout the state.
Okay.
I would like to make a comment there. Talk is pretty inexpensive at this point. In 6 years, Representative Moseley has mostly voted against every legislative effort that's been brought up in the legislature. I call him Dr. No. He's not ever signed or been part of either of the last two budgets. He did not sign or become part of the recent amendment to the criminal code in Indiana. Talking about veterans, I can tell you about veterans. I have been a veteran all my life, not just a veteran as a high school teacher. I've been where the rubber meets the road, so to speak, for 26 years of active duty. I know about veterans. I also probably would have done the same things that he has done. That is a normal thing that I think a legislator would do, considering the current situation with Iraq and so on. But what I'd really be concerned about is 6 years of, he claims that he wrote bills and he co-sponsored bills. I would challenge you to go to VoteSmart and show us the actual bills that you authored, co-authored, and were passed in the legislature. And I will tell you, it's practically nil, if not nil. This is the problem we have right now in the legislature. A lot of people want to talk about what they did. I'm a person that looks, let's get something accomplished. I've seen nothing accomplished. My adversary here, my opponent here, is he hasn't really represented the district across the board, in my opinion. I've been to town council since I started to run, and people have said he has never been to a town council meeting in Chesterton, and so on and so on. This is what I was told. Many people do not even know who Chuck Moseley is. I've gone throughout the district since June 23rd, knocking on doors, not just in Portage. See, Portage is not just the 10th district. The 10th district encompasses everything from Dune Acres on the east all the way over to the Ogden Dunes on the east and south and so on. Portage may be the most populous area of the district, but it is not the only one. And I did live in Portage for a while, and then I did move out to Liberty Township a few years ago. But that's in the district. So I have a pretty good feel for Portage, having worked there for all the majority of my career at the school. And now in Liberty Township, I'm familiar with some of the things over there too. So it's, being the district representative is not representing one town. So I do take exception to a few things that Chuck claims to have done. So
Okay,
I would throw that back at you.
Here are a couple things that you would do if you were elected.
Okay.
Before he answers that question, I think
All right,
it's fair that I
we
respond.
Okay.
need strategy. That's
So,
all.
so let's have a conversation about this. I meet on a regular basis with Bernard Doyle at the town of Chesterton. I meet on a regular basis with Sue Lynch, the president of the City Council of Portage. I meet on a regular basis with the superintendent of the Duneland Schools Corporation. I meet on a regular basis with the school board members of Portage Township Schools. Just sitting there and listening doesn't get things done. Meeting with them and finding out what their needs are gets things done. Now, in terms of Chuck Moseley didn't vote to pass the budget, he's absolutely correct. I did not vote to pass the last two budgets. And the reason I didn't vote to pass the last two budgets is just because all of the cuts in funding for public education and the attacks on public education in the state of Indiana. And as long as the attacks continue and the funding cuts occur in public education, which are going to hurt students and teachers and ultimately families, I'll continue to vote no on a budget that doesn't have a fair and balanced approach to education, however many education systems that the state wants to create. It needs to be fair and balanced, and it isn't. And in terms of never being able to get anything done, House Bill 1486, Indiana passes Rep. Moseley bill to help veterans find jobs. Senate Bill 331, Second Service for Veterans establishes a Second Service for Years for Veterans program for veterans to attract them to teaching jobs in the state of Indiana. House Bill 1193 creates the Indiana Heritage Innovation Fund. What that simply does is it attracts wind turbine manufacturers to Indiana if they agree to use American-made steel, because all the wind turbines you see along I-65, all the steel comes from China. House Bill 1560 creates retirement plans for teachers so they can better invest in their retirement when it's time for them to retire. It opens it up, gives them more options. An amendment to a bill that last session would have cut all of the funding for the Porter County Hazardous Waste Disposal Program. Myself and my Republican friend Jim Baird, we both filed an amendment to restore the funding for my district and for his district. $25,000 a year comes back to Porter County for hazardous waste disposal. They wanted to cut that $25,000 worth of funding. And then they wanted us here at home to start charging a fee for that. I don't think that's right. We were able to get that restored, and we saved the program. Senate Bill 5, protecting injury victims from unfair hospital liens. Right now, today, before this bill, hospitals were unfairly applying liens against people that were injured in an accident through no fault of their own. And they were putting liens on their homes. And these people were in the process of litigation to try to recover the dollars that it cost him from that injury that there was no fault of their own. Hospitals were putting liens on their homes. We limited that and sharply reduced that kind of burden and financial burden people would have, particularly senior citizens, because they weren't accepting their Medicare claim. They were just placing the lien against them. We stopped that. House Bill 1592, a health bill. It creates an opportunity and funding for healthcare workers to get their flu shots so that they're not constantly healthcare workers get sick. This allows them to be able to get flu shots so they're not passing this sickness back to senior citizens and disabled people in nursing homes and healthcare facilities. I could go on and on and on, Doug, but I know that time is short.
These bills
so I just wanted to make sure you knew what they were.
Representative Moseley, he may have signed to those things. He did not create these bills. I think after 6 years in the legislature, you should be the author of bills that pass the legislature. I could do the same thing. He has signed on bills that have 33 or more people that co-sign them. You know, I could sponsor anything. That is not being a proactive representative in the legislature.
So what would you author?
What would I author? I would author a bill. I would go back to the education thing. One of the things I think we need in the schools, he talks about the schools being attacked. It's easy to say the schools are being attacked by the current legislature, but they're really not being attacked, okay? We've had a very tough time over the last several years with a recession. We've had if you look at the latest revenues in Indiana, we haven't hit our targets for the last few months now. We have about $65–70 million below the projected revenues last year. They like to tout that there was $300 million taken out of school funding. It wasn't taken all out of school funding. It was taken out of higher education. It was taken out of other things within the state, about $200 million actually. The other $100 million is a lot of different cats and dogs. They like to attack schools. It's an emotional issue. My opponent here, when they do try to consolidate things, such as consolidating schools in Indianapolis, is against it. They've had a loss of students in the largest school system in Indiana over the last 3 or 4 years, and they've tried to consolidate those schools to save money. He voted against it because he's with the unions and the teachers. Teachers are more important than students oftentimes. The school funding in Indiana, it does need to be fixed. There's no question about it. Oftentimes, the best performing school gets the least amount of money. The least performing school gets the most. Educators are tired of that. Money is not producing the effect that people would want in education. It's more than just throwing money at the problem. The Democrats like to throw money at problems, and we could go on and on about that is not always effective in our society today. So what we want to do this year is we want to fix that funding formula. I want to be part of that. A lot of schools in Indiana complain. Even in your own paper several weeks ago, there was a front page article about the lack of funding in Indiana schools. It's a very emotional issue. But when you turn over to the sports page, Griffith High School is bragging about their $100 million football field. It's really a difference between needs and wants. I want to make sure that we have our needs established. And that this year is going to be a big target in the legislature. I'm all for that. One of the other things, education, teachers have been blamed for all the problems in the schools. It is not teachers. Currently, in Portage High School at least, they are evaluated 3 times a year. This is unnecessary interruption in the teaching process. I do not know how administrators can even do their other jobs within the school. The problem in schools is the white elephant in the room. It is parents, it is society. Kids are coming to the school broken in many cases, not in every case. And so what I'd like to do when I get down there, I'd like to put a bill forward to put character development in every grade level. And this will be teaching kids things like right and wrong, manners, ethics, geared towards a grade level that they're in. Community service, things that we remember as young kids doing that make you a better individual. And when you do that, it transitions into the actual academics of the student. If they're focused when they come into the classroom, they will do better. Okay, so that's one of the things I'd like to do. I want to continue fighting against the constant barbs about Common Core. My opponent here did not vote for the repeal of the Common Core, which in essence is really federal takeover of local schools. The last thing we need in Indiana is a federal government that is bloated to the excess right now to also get into the local education of our students. That is best left to the local communities, school boards, teachers, and parents. With Common Core, they like to tout that it was produced by educators. It wasn't produced by educators. There was not an educator on the initial development of those standards. They like to call it the governor's standards. There wasn't a governor involved. This is a bureaucratic grab at controlling our schools. And I won't even get into, I wouldn't care if it was a Republican-controlled government or a Democratic-controlled government. We do not need that in the schools. So I will be a strong advocate for maintaining control of our schools in Indiana and not having federal control. I would like to see less focus on university education. The paradigm of teachers and a lot of people today, they say that students need to go to college to be successful. It's said all the time. This is not true. I could take any number of tradesmen that live right in our district and show you that if you're going to base success on money, who make much more of an income than those who've gone to college over the last several years. College, universities has become big business. 50% of our students that go should never have gone to start because they drop out within the first 2 years. We're guilty of this as a state. We just reduced public university funding by almost $28 million this year. That was part of the $300 million that they like to tout. That's probably a good idea. So I'd like to have more emphasis put forth in trying to gear students towards vocational training and career training. So,
Well, I'd like to respond to the 10-minute speech, and I know we're pressed for time. My opponent said something that is very true. And what my opponent said is that I support teachers and I support unions. There's no doubt in my mind that I do, and there should be no doubt in yours or anyone else's mind that I do. My record speaks for itself that that's what I've done. Character development, passing laws on on teaching kids to behave, teaching kids right and from wrong. I can tell you that the parents that I know and that I'm friends with, they understand how to raise their kids. They don't need the state to tell them how to raise their kids. So basically what it boils down to is that if you want to be able to help public education, quit making the pie smaller and creating more slices of the pie and cutting the funding further and further and further. You're in the newspaper business, Doug. You know as well as I do. There has been cuts to funding for public education. You can't deny it, you can't run from it, and you can't hide from it. The fact of the matter is that we've gone from one education system in the state of Indiana to four, not with the same size of the pie, but with a smaller pie. And the slices are being cut smaller and smaller and smaller, and the funding keeps going down. And at some point in time, it's like a house of cards. It's all going to come crashing down. And now we see that my friends, my Republican friends on the other side of the aisle, just last week, realized and admitted that, yes, in fact, we need to revisit and take a look at traditional public education and maybe go back and fix some of the things that, in all fairness, unintentionally may have been created. But no, I didn't vote for the budget, and I'm not going to vote for a budget that is going to cut funding for education. It's plain and simple.
Okay. We have very little time left, but we should touch on the subject of infrastructure, roads, bridges, etc. John?
The problem with Indiana right now, like most states, is that we have a very tight revenue stream going on, and I place a lot of that blame to the recession. People are unemployed. We need to get good jobs in the state so that we can repair some of those things. A lot of people ask me questions about why did Indiana sell the toll road. Well, they did use a lot of that money to do about 80 or so infrastructure projects throughout the state. Erling Rogers just had a good article today where she laid some of those things out, which I thought was quite interesting. We do need to fix things, but to fix things, you have to increase the revenue of the state. You have to get it some way. We can't make a blood out of water in the state. Taxing people is very unsavory to people. So somewhere along the line, we do need to come up with the funds. There's a $2 billion reserve that we have, which would last about 49 days if we had an emergency. Some people want to get into that. So in some cases, it's an argument about better or good enough for the moment. For the moment, I would anticipate as the economy gets better that there's certainly going to need to be some infrastructure improvements in the state. So I think the legislators in Indianapolis, both sides, are trying very hard to do those things. But you're going to rob Peter to pay Paul. You want to maintain a balanced budget. You don't want to go in the hole. People do not want to be taxed, so there's got to be some compromises. I'm a person that can compromise on those kind of things, but it has to be prioritized. We go back to the school thing real quickly, just about prioritizing.
Let him answer.
I need to respond.
Let me just make my point.
Excuse me, I'm
respond.
sorry, we have to let Chuck respond.
Well,
I wasn't going to talk about the school.
well, we
that
can,
budget.
we take a look at roads and infrastructure. We take a look at how we're going to deal with that. In the last biennium budget, $400 million was set aside for roads and infrastructure. That following summer, the governor cut that, reverted $200 million away from that. At that time, the governor said the $200 million we have left that we are going to use, we're going to use on state roads for state projects, and we're not going to be able to provide any additional dollars back to local units of government for their roads. So as a result, here's what's going on. Porter County, cities and towns, they're going out and they're bonding to get their roads fixed. So guess what? The taxpayers are repaying the bond with interest. Now we have a $2 billion surplus sitting down in Indianapolis. The state is receiving interest on that. So regular folks like us back home, we're not realizing any of the benefits of the interest earned on the $2 billion, and we're turning around and paying interest on having to borrow because the money's not coming back. I don't believe that we should not have a surplus in the state of Indiana. But for crying out loud, $2 billion, when our roads are crumbling and we're afraid to drive over our bridges, something's got to be done. Here's what's got me really worried. Last month, or maybe 5 or 6 weeks ago, in Evansville, the State and Tax Fiscal Policy Committee met. And guess what their main concern or their main conversation topic was? Do we need to expand the sales tax to other goods and services? Well, what does that mean? Taxing groceries. What else does it mean? Expanding to other services. Oh, okay. It means taxing your health care. It means having to pay taxes if you use an attorney. It means having to pay sales tax if you go to the dry cleaner. I mean, we don't need to expand the sales tax. What we need to do is we need to have a bipartisan, agreeable plan on what, in fact, the surplus should be and get that money to go back to where it originally came from, local units of government and local taxpayers.